Well, it's good to see you back on this side. Thank you for taking the time to put your details in. Now I'd like to go through the 7 secret traits that make the ultimate difference to dating for you. The first trait that we're going to look at is tolerance. Now, tolerance plays a big part in relationships because if one person's got low tolerance, they expect things to be done a lot quicker and a lot faster. Whereas a person with a high tolerance, they look at the big picture and, things don't fuss them as much. And to understand this trait, what we're looking at is to do with the eyes, how close the eyes are to the nose. Now, the usual line of measurement is you take an eye and you can fit it in between the eyes, then therefore you're in the middle. Now, the further the eyes are apart, the more tolerant they are. And the closer they are, well, then that brings in the low tolerance. So you also might have, it'd be good to have your mechanic who's got close set eyes because he's going to be focused in as well with those low ranges. It actually helps him to focus in with that particular trait. So tolerance plays a big part in relationships. I often see, though, if those traits are opposite, it causes a huge amount of conflict. It's probably one of the primary areas. So that's our first trait, and you can read about that, of course, in the Ultimate Dating Guide. Now, the second trait that we're going to look at is sensitivity. Now, there are a number of ways to look at these traits. There's a few traits that are actually in play when it comes to sensitivity. But the one that we're primarily going to deal with here is to do with the distance of the skin from the nose to the top lip. Now, the shorter that gap is, the more sensitive that person can be to criticism. And they take things very, very personally. They're also very more conscious about the way that they actually dress and the things that they do. And the person with the longer gap has a much drier sense of humour. You often see it in politicians, and they don't really care what people say because it's just like water off a duck's back. But when it comes to relationships, this plays out in a big way because what we find happens is that the person with the long gap often says many things and they don't even think about what they say. But the person with the short gap has taken it very personally, taken it to the heart. And so I often say to the people with the short gap, think about, first of all, who is it that said what they said to you that hurt you? Did they have a long gap? And if they did, then reconsider what's been said to you. So this comes into play, a big part in the relationship. You may want to take that under some serious consideration when you're looking for your next date. And go and see how it plays out. Go and look at the people with those traits and it'll help you to understand it a lot easily. The next trait that we're going to look at is to do with the sex drive. Now, hey, this is a big one because we all have different drives, we all have different motives, and sometimes it's one of those subjects that we don't necessarily want to talk about. But it's probably going to be good to know exactly where a person's sex drive is before you even go out with them. And this little particular trait is probably worth everything that you're going to learn on this video. But it's to do with this finger here, the ring finger. Is the ring finger higher than the index finger? If it is, it generally indicates a higher drive. Now, I tested this over many years with people and I found that it had about a 95% accuracy. There are a couple of other traits that come into play which can play it out, but 95% of the time this trait's going to be a fair indicator. You look at both hands. If they're high on both hands, then obviously they're going to have that high drive and a high need. They look at sex as something like, it's a meal, you have it every day or second day or whatever. But on the opposite, if the trait is low, then this is probably not the primary focus of the person. And so if that focus is low, you can imagine, when that people first start going out together, yes, there's a lot of happenings there, but if over time, and I talk about the peanut theory in the book, where the little part that swells up in the hypothalamus, in the lady, for instance, when she first falls in love, it puts on the rose-coloured glasses. And there tends to be a lot of putting out, and usually people rush in and make, they start having children, they move in together, they get married, and that peanut will go down about 16 months later. And so therefore that higher drive that she seemed to have had will then disappear if her finger's low. If her finger's high, well, obviously the drive will probably continue on at that level. So, I find that if ever there was an issue that caused people to break up, it's probably this trait more than the other. because if one person's high and the other person's low, as time goes by, the satisfaction is not being fulfilled in the one person, whereas the other person doesn't really care. And so that often causes the person to look further afield and can end up in a lot of hassles. But if you're in a relationship and you've got the opposite traits, well, then you're just going to have to work out your compromise and how it can work. But that is one trait that plays a big part in the success of relationships. Now, I know that sex is not everything, but it's the sort of thing what makes the world go round. It's been here a long time. But I would say, like some people think, this is a great way to find someone, the right person to get laid with. You might want to seriously consider that whoever you sleep with, you're energetically connected to them for life. That's right, for life. Their energy patterns are actually brought into your patterns. And unless you know the secret teachings of how to break those energy patterns, you could be there a long time with that person in your life. So be careful about the decisions. Use it respectfully. And this information here is to help you to have a better life. So that's the sex trait. The next trait we're looking at is personal space. And this is to do with the eyebrows. Now, the higher the eyebrows off the eyes, the more the person respects and desires that their space is more precious to them. So if you've got low set eyebrows, personal space, you're probably fairly comfortable if someone touches you, it's not going to phase you out. But if you've got the high set eyebrows and someone comes into your personal space uninvited, it can really put you off. I use the example in sales, for instance, if you're selling, and someone comes to you who's got high set eyebrows, say hello to them, step back, be comfortable. Well, it's the same with relationships. Don't get into their personal space real quick if they've got the high set eyebrows. But you may want to consider there can be some conflict of interest that happens with this particular trait. If you have people, say the lady has the high set eyebrows and you've got low set eyebrows, you go to a party, you have a couple of drinks, you just be friendly normally as you normally would, and you get into people's personal space. Meanwhile, she's looking at you and thinking, well, you're flirting, but to you it's natural, and so an element of jealousy begins, and so then the conflict starts. Over time, this wears away. So you want to be conscious about that trait. If your partner, the person you're dating or considering dating, has that trait, understand it, respect it, and then you can work with it accordingly. But that's the trait that relates to personal space. And it has more implications than that as well. But I think that gives you the idea. If you do the course, then you'll be able to learn more about it and how that all fits in as well. The next trait that we're going to look at is to do with money. Now, when you're referring to money, what do you mean? Well, the example that we're going to use here is how much does a person like to spend? How easy is it for them to spend? There's probably about 3 traits that come in play here. But the main one that you probably need to know is to do with the ears. The closer the ears are to the back of the head, the more likely they are to find it easy to spend money. If the ears are right out, they tend to hang on and hoard the money. Now, this can create conflict in a relationship if one's wanting to spend, one's wanting to hang on. So you have a lot of indecision that starts taking place with those aspects. So, and also if you do have the ears close back, you might want to monitor some of your spending habits so you don't spend it all and the person just sees you as a big waster. So it's also good to understand where you fit into this category. So money is a very interesting thing, and so you might want to consider very carefully before you ask a person out on a date. Particularly if you like to spend a bit now and then and they don't, it will cause conflict, and you'll be the one paying for all the dates, by the way. So there you go, that's money. Now for our next trait, we're going to look at activity. Now activity, again, there's several traits that come in play, and I can't go through them all here at the moment, but when you do the course you'll be able to understand them all. But the one that we're considering here is to do with the cheekbones. If the cheekbones are high, it generally indicates that the person is adventurous. They like to travel, they like to do things, they like to have new adventures. You often see air hostesses with high set cheekbones because it suits their personality very easily. But there's some other aspects to do with this trait as well. You'll find that if a person has that high activity, they just don't want to sit at home. They don't want to sit there and do nothing. They need to have some sort of adventure in their life. They need to have something that's going to spark that along. And if the opposite person doesn't have that trait or some of the other traits that are similar to it, it can make life very hard in a relationship, because the one person will be wanting to go, the other one's staying there. Now what happens over time is that person will be either very unhappy because they're not fulfilling their part of their life, and then you know the old saying, if it's the woman, if mama ain't happy, nobody ain't happy. If it's the man, he can get very frustrated and very angry because he can't do what he wants to do. You'll also find that, if one person then starts to go off and do all the things that they want to do, it creates a drift within the relationship, and before you know it, bingo bango, it's all over and they're with somebody else. So you may want to consider that trait, and if you do have the opposite traits in a relationship, a little bit of give and take goes a long way to work around that particular trait of adventurousness and activity. So there you go. Now the last trait that we're going to look at in our 7 secret dating traits is to do with the eyelids. Now we often call them exposed eyelids or hooded eyelids. So basically the exposed eyelids, you can actually see the eyelids when you're talking with somebody. Now what this usually indicates is a person is they're very quick and get to the point in some respects. It works 2 ways, by the way. So if you're blah 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 and you're just talking too much, they just switch off. You really need to get to the point with them, bring it home. They often make their decisions much quicker. It doesn't mean that they won't talk a lot, so you need to understand that, but they do come to making decisions a lot quicker. Now on the opposite side of the trait, if you have the person who's got the hooded eyelids, in other words where you can't see the eyelids, they can be more analytical. They need more information before they actually make the decision, and they often ask lots of questions, they're a lot more talkative, and they're happy to get lots and lots of information back in. Now if you've got the 2 opposites in a trait, this can drive them crazy one way or another. And so you really want to look at that trait, because, you can work around that trait as long as you understand it. It's not absolutely critical in some respects, but you need to understand that if you're trying to get a point across and the person's got exposed eyelids, get to the point, say your point. And if you're the person with the analytical eyelids or the hooded eyelids, understand that sometimes you're not going to always get a big answer to your question. You might ask a question and be very brief and you're wanting more information. And so then the question is, you start asking more questions only because you want to know, and the other person's getting peed off because you keep asking all these questions. So it's a conflict of communication. So you just need to be able to understand how the 2 people communicate. So that's to do with communication. Now we've been through the 7 traits, and they'll help you to understand much about a person. If you'd like to know over 70 odd traits that have a 92% plus accuracy, please come and do my course. It's not going to cost you a fortune, and it'll be a lot of fun, and you'll be surprised at the level that it'll help you to be able to find people, communicate with them, understand the way that the things they do. It's a great course, and you can find the course, of course, at www.face-reading.com.au, and there's an example of how the course is there as well. So thank you for the time. I hope you enjoyed all this, and I look forward to working with you in the Face Reading course. Thank you. Bye.